Well, good evening. I'd like to call to order the September 16th meeting of the Santa Barbara Harbor Commission. Ms. Rodriguez, would you make a roll call, please?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer,
Here.
Commissioner Nelson,
Here.
Commissioner Sly,
Here.
Commissioner Sloan is absent at tonight's meeting. Commissioner Stanowicz.
Here.
Commissioner Stedman,
Here.
Chair McCray.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening?
Hey, good evening, Chair McCray and Harbor Commissioners. Yeah, I do have one proposed change to the agenda. Item number 10, the Harbor Patrol activities update. I'd like to just postpone that until next meeting. That would give us a little more time to put it together. It's not time sensitive, and we've got a fair amount on this agenda, so I think it would do us best to postpone that one.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Rodriguez, do we have any general public comments on items not already on this evening's agenda?
At the moment, there's nobody from the audience that has their hand raised, but I do want to remind the public that if they would like to make a public comment for general public comment or any items on the agenda, they would indicate that by clicking the raise and lower your hand icon on the control panel. And when it's their turn, I'll call on them to speak and they'll have 2 minutes. If they're speaking on an item that is on the agenda, then they would want to wait until that agenda item is being discussed to raise their hand though. Thank you. There's still nobody who's raised their hand.
Well, thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to take a look at the consent calendar this evening. And this is the first time, I think, in a long time that we've had one. And it's in the interest of getting through the agenda in a timely fashion this evening. There are 3 items. There's the usual approval of the minutes. And then there are 2 proposed lease agreements, which we will recommend or not to the City Council for approval. There's one with Stearns Wharf Bait and Tackle and another with Madam Rosinka out on the pier. If any of the commissioners would prefer that we pull any of these items out of the consent calendar to look at them separately, I would like to hear that. Hearing nothing, I'll assume, go ahead.
No objection.
That sounds good. Well, hearing nothing, I'll assume that we can go ahead and look to these items as a single thing on the consent calendar this evening. Do we have any questions of staff with respect to any of the items? And hearing none, I will assume not. So then at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second. Second.
It's moved and seconded. We are going to try yet a third way to do the vote. We're going to do it by raise hand this time to hopefully be able to speed the process, but also be able to see in the record who voted and in what way. So all those in favor of those.
I'm sorry, Chairman McCray, I have to interrupt as this is Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney. And as we discussed at last month's meeting, when we're doing remote meetings, it's required by the government code that all votes be taken by roll call vote. So unfortunately, even though it would be a speedier method, we're prohibited from taking votes in that fashion.
Well, thank you very much. That's good to know. So Ms. Rodriguez, would you do us the kindness of a roll call vote?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Sly,
Yes.
Commissioner Sloan, I'm sorry, excuse me, Sloan is absent. Commissioner Stanowicz,
Yes.
Commissioner Stedman, Commissioner Stedman,
Aye. Sorry, I was muted.
that's okay. And Chair McCray.
Yes.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda this evening are department updates, and we'll start with the director's report, and I'll turn to Mr. Mike Wilshire.
Yeah, again, good evening, Chair McCray and Harbor Commissioners. And first off, I want to take a little bit of the blame for the option to vote by hand. That was me trying to get a little bit smart and efficient. But once again, I apologize to Attorney Connect and the Harbor Commission. So we'll do what we're told. Anyway, so yeah, good evening, everyone, and whoever's tuned in. I really only have one main item to present on today, which is an update on our cruise ship program. So if there's no questions up front, I'll get right into it. Next slide. Oh yeah, we'll skip one forward. Yeah, there we go. So as you all know, Santa Barbara's operated a cruise ship program for quite some time. The last year and a half really has been a little different. We haven't had a cruise ship visit since March of 2020 due to COVID. Additionally, there have been some recent decisions made to continue the suspension of cruise ships until March of 2022 as a result of the recent surge in COVID cases locally and nationally. With all this going on, I figured it was a good time to give a little history on the cruise ship program and just kind of take a little deeper dive in it and give a little plans for the future. So for a little background, Santa Barbara began welcoming cruise ships back in 2002, so roughly 20 years ago. Initially, there were not a lot of visits, with only 8 ships between 2002 and 2007, so a relatively slow start. In 2009 is when Santa Barbara really saw an increase in ship visits. And ironically, this was due to the swine flu outbreak in Mexico. And so the cruise lines were kind of looking for places to go and began trying other ports in California and the West Coast, including Santa Barbara, as opposed to going to Mexico. As the program progressed, the city and the waterfront really fine-tuned the operation. So one of the key features to note is that these cruise ship visits are really limited to shoulder seasons, so fall, winter, spring, and really non-busy times, and quite often midweek. So we don't accept, and we have never historically accepted any cruise visits during the busy summer months. Next slide. All right, so here's a chart kind of showing the number of visits per year dating back to 2010. This kind of puts it in perspective and gives it a little bit of scale. So as you can see, we saw our most visits back in kind of 2014 and 2016, with a maximum visits of 29 ship visits per year. We haven't, as the city or the waterfront, established a maximum or minimum visits per year. We've kind of just been managing this program as it goes. We do adhere strictly to that shoulder season requirement and don't overlap ship visits with any known city events or particular busy times. And we only host one ship at a time. So with all this thought about it, it seems like the program can and has easily support kind of the 25 to 30 ship range, but we've never really strayed too far above that. Next slide. As far as economic impact, so it's pretty widely touted and somewhat well analyzed that the cruise ship program does have a pretty big positive economic impact on the community. So in 2013, Visit Santa Barbara conducted an in-depth report that included passenger surveys and analysis showing an annual estimated impact to the business community of about $2 to $3 million per year. In addition to that, so the waterfront budget directly receives fees from the cruise lines, and on our most recent year, we budgeted about $400,000 for fees directly paid from the cruise line. So there is a definite economic impact to our budget specifically. Obviously, over the past year and a half, these revenues have not been present. They have not been received, along with the larger loss to the business community, whatever economic impact they would see. And I mentioned this Visit Santa Barbara report. That's certainly available to everyone. It's a pretty interesting report that takes a deep dive into kind of passenger surveys and really kind of analyzing the data from these ships. So if anybody wants that, they can reach out to myself or the waterfront, and I can post that or make that available. It's a public document. Next slide. So for the public and those who don't know, just a little bit about the mechanics of how the cruise ship program works. So we're a tender port, which really means that we don't have facilities that allow the ships to tie up right at shore. The ships usually anchor roughly about a mile offshore and use tenders to get passengers to shore. All of the passengers arrive at the same spot. They arrive at the sea landing facility where they're greeted by ambassadors. And then there's a whole bunch of other shoreside services provided: tents and restrooms, security, buses and transportation for local excursions. And we do also close down a lane of Cabrillo Boulevard. I'm sure you've seen it there back when cruise ships did come in. There's sort of that greeting area on Cabrillo Boulevard. And just a little shout out, these shoreside services are really a joint effort that includes the Waterfront Department, Visit Santa Barbara, the Chamber of Commerce, Sea Landing, and some other city departments, police and public works weigh in as well. Next slide. So obviously there's always environmental concerns with the operation and use of a cruise ship. I mean, it's a giant vessel, it's a giant floating city. So there are concerns in our local waters and in general. Locally, we do have agreements in place with every ship that's Visit Santa Barbara. And this comes in the way of a captain's declaration. So this is basically a signed agreement with every ship captain. And some of the things that are outlined in these captain's declarations include kind of no discharging within 12 miles of Santa Barbara, no use of ship incinerators, and notification requirements in the case of accidental discharges. Additionally, they abide by some reduced speed limits in the channel. Next slide. All right, so with regards to the cruise ship program going forward, overall, historically, this has been a pretty well-received and well-run program that does bring a significant economic benefit to the community and the Waterfront Department. The Waterfront Department really remains in constant contact with the cruise lines and the CDC and Santa Barbara County Health. And what we're trying to do, we're really trying to evaluate when is the appropriate time to kind of reinstate and re-welcome ships back into Santa Barbara. So as I mentioned, we did make the decision to suspend ship visits through at least March of 2022. And so this resulted in the cancellation of 14 previous scheduled ships that were scheduled to come basically between now and the end of the year. These were ships that were scheduled mainly before COVID. This is kind of long range planning. So the cruise lines typically schedule visits 12, 24, even 36 months out. And so it's really, really long range. As of now, we have 27 ship visits planned for spring of 2022 and 15 visits planned for fall of 2022. Just anecdotally, there really is a pent-up demand in the industry. And so this kind of shows with these increased bookings for the out months and out years. So again, we'll just kind of keep tabs on it as we go, and we have time. And so we'll kind of see as we get closer to spring where we're at with COVID and where we're at with the industry, and really touch back in with the community and determine when it's right to host these ships again. So that wraps up my update on cruise ships. I wanted to see if there are any questions from the group or if there was any public comment.
I've got a question. This obviously was a big decision. This was a multi-million-dollar decision you made to cancel these. And I'm just kind of curious about the decision-making process and who you touched base with and how you arrived at the decision to cancel.
Yeah, with a ship being scheduled basically a week from now, our main touch points were kind of CDC recommendations and Santa Barbara County Health. These agreements that we have with cruise ships, they sort of book these in pretty far out years. And so most of the ships scheduled in fall were kind of moving them around and shuffling anyway. A number of them were canceled by the cruise lines themselves. And so we just didn't think that we were quite there yet as a community to be sort of the first ones diving back into this.
Did Santa Barbara Health Department basically, did they say to you, we recommend against it? Did you take a look at what other ports are doing? Are they landing anywhere else? I'm just curious. I completely agree with the decision.
These are great questions. We consulted with our neighbors, so we consulted with Monterey and Avalon. Monterey is a little more conservative as of now. They're basically suspending cruise ships until spring of 2023, so an additional year beyond us. Avalon is, we haven't got an exact answer from Avalon. They're seeming like they may be willing to take cruise ships this fall and winter, but they were also mentioning that they could potentially delay till spring as well. So I think they were waiting for a little more information. And those two ports are most similar as their tender ports as well. So they're very, very similar to how we do our operations. Any other questions on that? Yeah, Commissioner Kramer.
Yes, thank you for your report, and thank you also for offering the Visit Santa Barbara report. I'm wondering that 400,000 for the waterfront, is that net? Because you'll be paying employees anyway, and or do you hire people specially for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Those are fees that are paid directly to us. So the cruise lines pay us $7 per passenger directly to the waterfront if the passengers get off the vessel or not. And so that is a direct loss of revenue. That's revenue that we're not seeing anymore. We do have some shoreside expenses when cruise ships come to visit. We have staff time and rentals and some security that we do pay for. And so those expenses portion have been reduced a little bit. It is certainly does not even come close to the $400,000 we would have seen in revenues, but yeah, it is a pretty substantial revenue loss for the waterfront department.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any more questions?
I have one more question. Do you know, Mr. Wiltshire, whether Visit Santa Barbara plans to interview the various businesses that they interviewed before as to what they think of the cruise ships not coming, if they've suffered from this, or what the feeling on State Street is?
Yeah, good question. We reached out to Visit Santa Barbara and the downtown organization and the Chamber of Commerce. We actually gave a similar presentation to this, to those groups, and kind of fielded questions and took some response from them as well. Obviously, those groups are fairly pro cruise ships, so they realize the economic impact to the community. But they were overall fairly understanding of the impacts and then the health concerns to the community. So although we didn't want to be the first to rush back into this, I'm optimistic that it's a well-run program. There are benefits. So we're trying to give it the best chance to really come back and be accepted by the community again, as opposed to being rejected out of the gates.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, my own impression is that it's a well-run program. I mean, there's obviously criticism of the potential environmental impacts, but there's nothing that I have seen that has documented them. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wiltshire, I believe you have a second item in your report.
Yeah, next slide. So just as usual, here's a quick snapshot on a few key items that I plan to address at future meetings. And again, I just go over this just to let the commission and the public know that we kind of have these things that are a little out there, and we're still getting to them. So a few things that we have coming in the future are Waterfront Municipal Code update. This is kind of typically something we would do every year. It's been a little bit longer than that now, but we still want to come with sort of a Muni Code roundup and cleanup to Harbor Commission. So you can expect that in the future. Our Clean Marina program, which is a great program, and we gave an update on it last year. Usually every fall, winter, we kind of provide an update and some stats on that Clean Marina program. And still planning to get to it, the insurance requirement for vessels in harbor. I know this is a big topic, and so we do want to put together a discussion and bring that back to you guys. And then our waterfront parking permit sales. So every winter-ish, we start our parking permits for the coming year go on sale. And so we wanted to kind of advertise that and bring that information back to Harbor Commission. And then again, we'll get to that Harbor Patrol update that was supposed to be handled today, but we'll get that at the October meeting. So with that, unless there's any parting questions on my part, I'll pass it over to Mr. Brian Bossy for his business update.
Good evening, Chair McCray, Commissioners. Happy Thursday. I'm here with a brief business report. I wanted to give you all an update on the city's, or at least the waterfront's version of the deferred rent program. So next slide, please. Back in, I believe it was early April of 2020, the city provided, city tenants with the opportunity to enroll in a deferred rental program in order to assist those businesses during the heart of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the deferred rent program was made available to all tenants, and it went from April of 2020 through December 31st of 2020. Originally, we had 19 of our 61 tenants enroll in that program. Next slide, please. So some details about the deferred rent program. So we basically have two groups of tenants as it turns out, those that suffered economic hardship and those that did not. And so we define economic hardship in this instance as businesses that lost 25% or more of their revenues in calendar year 2020 when compared with a 3-year average from 2017, 2018, and 2019. So if you lost 25% or more, you were able to enroll in an incentive program in order to try and get people to pay a little bit earlier as opposed to later. So those that did not receive the economic hardship name tag, if you will, they're required to pay in full by the end of this calendar year. So December 31st of 2021. Now, those who did suffer economic hardship, we made it a tiered process. So if you pay whatever you pay us in this calendar year, you get a 20% discount. The following year, 10%. The year after that, 5%. And the final year, the 4th year, you just have to pay it all with no reduction in the rental fee, or the deferred rent, if you will. Next slide, please. So as of December, when we ended the program, December 31st of 2020, we had 19 tenants and nearly $1.5 million in deferred rent. As of a few weeks ago, September 3rd, we had 13 of our tenants have paid the entirety back of what they owed in deferred rent. And currently we have 6 tenants outstanding who owe combined approximately $400,000. So the incentive program is working, as well as even the folks who didn't get the incentive, many of them have already paid in full or are paying a bit month by month. So we're on the way to recovering. It's the incentive program is definitely working. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about this month's business services report.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Brian, for that report. Do you know if any other of the city departments have done this deferred rent? And I think the rate of payback has been tremendous here.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, the 2 other departments that have tenants, if you will, are the airport, which has about double of what we have. They did not roll out an incentive program because they received funding, if I'm not federal funding, from the Federal Aviation Administration. So they were kind of in a different situation than us here at the waterfront. And then as far as Parks is concerned, they have 2 tenants. One is at the Cabrillo Pavilion, and so they hadn't even started up yet. And then the other is at the golf course, and I believe they didn't meet that 25% reduction. I can't exactly recall, but they had one tenant that I believe they'll work with to get the money back, the deferred rent.
Well, thank you. No, I think that the waterfront program has just been tremendous, and thank you for it.
Anything further? Well, with that, I'll turn to Mr. Brian Adair with item number 6 of the Facilities Management Report.
Hello, Commissioners. This is Brian Adair, Facilities Manager. Next slide, please. This evening, I'd like to give you a briefing on our capital projects. And this is just the major ones that I'd like to share with you this evening. Next slide, please. The Ice House renovation project is to replace the ice equipment and delivery system to continue supplying ice to the fish industry. Also to repair the building and do some minor safety improvements. We have a budget of $560,000. Year to date, we spent $69,000, mostly on professional services. We went to City Council this month to get approval to standardize our ice equipment. And this month, we also received 90% completion of the construction drawings from the architect. Next month, we will receive an estimate because due to inflation, also the change in scope of work, we're going to get an updated estimate of the project. And then we'll submit a building application to the Building and Safety Department. Once we get a permit, we'll go out to bid. Any questions on this project?
Yes, what would you estimate the construction time or start beginning, commencing, Brian?
That's a good question. Once we get into contract with a general contractor, there is a lead time. They will have to order the equipment from the ice manufacturing company, equipment company. So that could be a 2-month lead time. But I'm hoping that we can finish construction if we decide to. We want to minimize the disruption of supplying ice to the fish industry and the retail businesses that depend on it. But we'll try to discuss when's the best window to minimize that disruption. But if we just follow the sequence, I'm hoping to complete the project by next summer.
Wow, that's great news.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The main parking lot lighting improvement, we have had concerns about safety and security in the main parking lot. So we have a budget to improve lighting. We have a budget of $250,000. Year to date, 0 expenses. On the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to be proposing to be installing a 2 headlight fixture on top of our existing light poles to keep the cost down. The photo on the top right is a photo of what's existing. So we're going to install a sample light fixture next month, and then we'll order and install as soon as possible. But again, due to COVID, there is a lead time for ordering the supplies and materials. Next slide, please. On the accommodation docks ADA gangway project, we want to improve public access. We have a budget of $205,000. Year to date, we spent $23,000 on professional services. This project goes back quite a bit. Back in 2020, the Architectural Board of Review approved the project, the conceptual drawings. This past spring and this summer, we went through coastal permitting agencies, and after going through the whole process, they understood the size and magnitude of the project, and it was small enough that they approved to waive any permit requirements. By the end of this month, we'll have 100% construction drawings by Moffett and Nichols. We'll then proceed to Building and Safety Department and submit a building permit application. If we get that cleared, we'll go for a bid advertisement in December. And the photo there shows it's hard to see, but it shows the proposal of that design. Any questions? Next slide, please. It's very important to keep our Harbor Patrol equipment up and running to top performance. Anyways, Harbor Patrol boat number 2 needs a hull rehab, which also includes repairing the deck. The boat is very strong, very sturdy. We believe it has a lot of life left into it, but we have to do a preventive maintenance to repair any gel coat on the boat where the fiberglass is cracking, the transom, the deck. Once you have water intrusion, if you don't address it, it could get worse. And right now it's more feasible for us to repair the boat than to replace it. So we created a job scope recently and working with purchasing right now to advertise for bids. We'll award the contract in December and complete in April. Any questions?
I do have a question.
Yes, sir. Chair McCray.
Yes, so in this repair that you're contemplating, that you've got scheduled, I'm understanding the deck and the hull are actually solid. It's just you're looking at repairing some damage to the overlaying fiberglass?
Yes, that is correct. And the cracks that we do have does have some water intrusion into the plywood structure. It's not bad, but once you open up the plywood deck or the hull, we can verify what additional repairs need to be done now. But from what we can see, the boat's in very good condition, and it's a very well-performing boat as well, as I understand.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, please continue.
Thank you, sir. Next slide, please. This is another project that's been discussed for a long time. It's the remodeling of Marina number 2 restroom for ADA and building code compliance. Restrooms Marina 3 and 4 have been done already, and this is the next one that we would like to accomplish. We have a budget of $450,000. Year-to-date expenses are $20,000 for professional services. The original construction drawings were done back in 2018, so we're kind of trying to revamp this project now that we're through COVID-19. And so we want to review the construction drawings and update anything that needs to be done, then go out to bid in December, hopefully award a contract in January and be completed again by next summer. Any questions? Next slide, please. The Waterfront Business Operations has some projects that they like to do. They want to replace 6 parking pay stations in Ledbetter parking lot. They want to replace SKIDATA parking lot hardware, such as gates, ticket columns, and some security cameras. We have a budget of $243,000, 0 expenses year to date. We want to issue a purchase order this month and complete the project by April. Any questions? Next slide, please. We have a lot of deferred maintenance on the wharf and in the harbor. So we try to create a budget for those deferred maintenance capital renewal projects. We have a budget of $300,000. This funding is for miscellaneous facility infrastructure repair projects, such as replacing 10 dock fingers per year, replacing deck boards, additional deck boards on Stearns Wharf, addressing building termite damage, additional power repairs at the city pier, painting facilities, and also doing infrastructure repairs. So we have a long laundry list, and it's a kind of unique system, and I want to give credit to our maintenance staff. We try to do a lot of this work in-house with in-house labor, which saves us a tremendous amount of money. But sometimes we don't have enough manpower or expertise. We will contract it out. But a lot of this work is done in-house, thanks to the maintenance staff. Any questions? Next slide, please. Stearns Wharf Sewer Lift Station. This is another project that initially was a complete replacement from beginning to end. And we looked at it differently. Again, the maintenance crew stepped up to the plate and said, hey, we can do that. So right now we've only spent about $104,000. I'm sorry, we have a budget now of $104,000, and we expensed about $28,000, mostly on material. It's hard to track labor, in-house labor on projects like this, but I'll look for a solution for that going forward. We've already, last year, we replaced 500 linear feet of 2-inch compressed air lines. We replaced pneumatic controls, tubing, and tank receivers that support these 3 pot stations. Recently, we installed and replaced an old air compressor, which is more energy efficient and also supplies drier air, cleaner air, and we're having a lot less issues with our sewer system because of it. Right now, we're planning to replace the remaining 300 linear feet of 2-inch compressed air lines. And then on some of the pots, we've got some old check valves and gate valves that we would like to replace. They're very expensive, so we're looking at alternatives. Any questions?
Yeah, yes, I have a question, Brian. So on all of this maintenance that you're updating us on, what is your system for keeping track of what needs maintenance? When I was a naval officer, we had a program called 3M, Maintenance Material Management. And we literally we had cards for every piece of equipment on board, whatever ship, you were serving aboard. And it was very simple and straightforward. You'd pull cards on equipment, and depending on the time of, year, the maintenance would be indicated, including any kind of replacement or upgrade. So how is it that you keep track of all these moving parts?
We do use Cartograph. It's a software that's a citywide sponsored software, and that helps us track what's been done, labor hours and costs. But it's a new software that I believe the waterfront embraced about 1.5 years ago. And we're not fully up to speed on using that software. And currently we're considering branching off of that and going to something very simple. Like you said, the cards were very simple, very basic. It provided a good quick reference. So we need a software that's really caters to facilities management and equipment management. So we're looking at a better solution to achieve that goal.
Thanks for that insight.
And hopefully we'll have that software in place by the end of this fiscal year.
But by the way, on the maintenance system that I was describing, every single line item had the man hours, scribed to whatever item. So it's a pretty ingenious system considering the complexity of, an aircraft carrier, for example.
Yes, I agree, and I hope to get there soon. Make it more simple and more direct and more friendly, user-friendly for what we need is really important. Any other questions?
Yes. Brian, am I reading this right? That your maintenance crew just saved us $400,000? That if we'd budgeted $520,000 and they can now do it for 104, there's $16,000 in savings? Am I right or am I reading that wrong?
I'd like to say it a different way. The original budget was intended to replace the entire system, all the nuts and bolts, everything. And that is one prudent way of doing it, but to put the capital money in other places has a higher priority. We felt that this was not the time to take that approach. So we're replacing components that need replacement and getting additional life out of the other components that have a longer life available to us.
The reason I ask is one of the questions I'm going to ask Brian when he does his budget update and review is where do we stand with the deferrals of capital funding for maintenance projects? And would the savings that you're showing here would it be able to put those funds in projects that we had to defer because of the impact of the pandemic?
I think I understand your question. The funds that become available, they're redirected to other priorities. The COVID impact to our finances, I can't speak to that.
Okay, I'll use mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Next slide, please. We do an annual Stearns Wharf annual heavy timber project, and the purpose is to replace small portions of heavy timber piles, decking, and to spread out the cost of the remaining structure in good standing over several years. We typically budget $550,000 for this. Half of it goes to materials and half goes to the contractor to replace those items that need replacing. So currently it's a long lead time for ordering heavy timber. So Nels Anderson worked with purchasing, and they got a contract out already, and we've got material on order. So this past summer, we have some excellent divers here, some hourly divers from Santa Barbara City College, really help us a lot, but they inspected 800 piles and cleaned them. So now that we know what the situation is, we can create a bid scope and go out to bid. Currently, we are reinforcing 3 piles under the Harbor Restaurant. These piles cannot be replaced, so we try to extend the life of them by putting a jacket, epoxy coated jacket around them, and that extends the life of those piles. That's going on currently. So once we get the job scope written, we'll go out to bid in November and complete construction in February. Next slide, please. That's all my presentation. Any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back to yes,
Mr. Dare, I have a question. If we could go back to the
Commissioner Sly, it seems you're
Ice House issue
lacking
for a
some
moment.
bandwidth.
If
Commissioner Sly?
the Ice House is down for some number of months, its source.
could you repeat the question, or Commissioner Sly?
Commissioner Sly, you might try turning off the video to ask the question. That might get you across.
Okay, is this any better?
Much. Go for it.
Okay, I was asking if the Ice House is down for some number of months, how does the commercial fleet source their ice requirement during that time?
It's a good question. I've been thinking about it, but I don't have a good solution. There's an ice manufacturer that sells blocked ice in Ventura, and maybe we can look into renting a ice shaving machine that would shave the ice off the blocks, but that responsibility may fall on the commercial fishermen to figure that one out. But I'll be proactive in working with the fishermen and try to have meetings, town hall meetings, to discuss that topic and see if we can't do something collectively. But that's a very good question, that we haven't come across that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you, commissioners and chair. Bye-bye.
And some great questions as well. It's very insightful, Mr. Stedman, Commissioner Stedman. So with that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Ingebretson for the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Chair McRae and Harbor Commissioners. Hope everyone's safe and healthy. For the members of the public who don't know who I am, my name's Eric Ingebretson, and I'm the Harbor Operations Manager. And with that, we'll get started with our operations report. Next slide, please. Well, the U.S. Coast Guard releases its recreational boating accident statistics annually. And they do this through a criteria for boating accidents that involve death, disappearance, injury, requiring more than basic first aid, and damage to vessels in excess of $200 and or the loss of a vessel. Next slide, please. Unlike many industries that suffered tremendously during the pandemic, the recreational boating industry has increased significantly, especially locally. Our harbor has remained almost at full capacity for visiting vessels transiting the area during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, with increased boating, there were 767 boating fatalities nationwide, which accounts for a 25.1% increase from 2019. Vessel accidents increased 26% from 4,168 to 5,265. And non-fatal injury victims, that increased 24.7 from 2,559 to 3,191. And again, alcohol continues to be the leading contributing factor in fatal boating accidents and accounts for 18% of the total fatalities. Next slide, please. Additional information from the Coast Guard report, the fatality rate was 6.5 deaths per 100,000 registered recreational vessels. And this is the highest number since the program started. The rate increase was 25%. Property damage was estimated at $62.5 million. And operator inexperience, improper lookout, excessive speed, operator inattention were primary contributors. Next slide, please. Can't be said enough. U.S. Coast Guard reports that 75% of our boating accidents, the victims drowned. So life jackets save lives. Of those reported drownings, 86% were not wearing personal flotation devices. Boating safety instruction was mentioned in their statistics, and nationwide, 77% of the boating deaths occurred on vessels where the operator received no formal training. That concludes this section of my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, seeing none, please continue.
Okay. Finally, regretfully, the Waterfront Department has had to cancel the upcoming Harbor Seafood and Festival in October. This decision was not made lightly, but due to the uptick in COVID-19 infections countywide, and the department really felt it was the right thing to do in the spirit of health and safety of our community. Additionally, the department noted a significant decrease in vendor participation. As stated in my report, we would normally have seen between 30 or 40 out-of-town vendors at this time registered for this event, but we only had 3. So, we're optimistic, and as we approach pre-COVID times, that we'll be able to bring some of our great events back online. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Betsy?
Thanks for the report, Eric. Who were the brave 3 who agreed to go forward?
Commissioner or Chair McRae, Commissioner, Vice Chair Kramer, I I don't know. They were out of town, but I can
Oh,
find that
okay.
information.
No,
for
I was
you.
just curious. I mean, it's surprising that so many had canceled out.
And again, those were out of town vendors. So a lot of our locals as well. Not all of them canceled, but for example, Brophy Brothers Restaurant was unable just for staffing
I see.
considerations. I think a lot of our restaurants are kind of suffering from that right now. Just trying
Right.
to get staffing back to run their restaurants.
Well, let's hope for next year.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Ingebretson? Thank you for that somewhat sobering yet very important report. With that, we'll move to new business. And I'll turn to Mr. Brian Bossie for the fiscal year 2021 preliminary budget review.
Good evening again, commissioners. As Chair McCray just stated, a quick budget review of how we ended up with fiscal year 2021, which ended June 30th of this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so here is kind of the down and dirty of our revenue summaries for fiscal year 2021. On the left are the various revenue components or divisions, and then the 21 budget, what we actually took in, whether it was over or under budget, variance over and under budget, and an actual compared to, sorry, I should say, fiscal year 2020, what we took in actually. So big picture, and I'll get into these in following slides. Big picture is we came in about 9% over our budgeted estimates. That's the equivalent of about just shy of $1.3 million. And recall, we really tapped down all of our revenue projections for fiscal year 2021, and we did the same with our expenditures as well. Next slide, please. So again, overall about $1.3 million above the budgeted estimates. Our commercial leases, they had a good year for the most part. They were up about 23% or $370,000. Our food service leases, it's good to see a positive there, +1, about $40,000 above what we had estimated. Our visitor fees had a big bump. I think that goes back to Mr. Ingebretson's statement about how recreational boating and it has on the increase. I think we saw the results of that with this, 31% or $162,000. And then our slip permit transfer fees up 71% or $709,000. This year, I believe, our total was $1,709,000. That's the biggest one-year total we've ever had here at the waterfront. So yacht brokers are doing a big business, hence part of that commercial lease increase. Next slide, please. So more along those lines, our parking was up about 3.5%, almost $100,000. That's good to see. We've seen and continue to see increases in our parking. I believe Labor Day Sunday, we saw our largest Labor Day Sunday ever, to the tune of about $24,000 in one day. So things are looking up for parking for the most part. Our other fees and charges, that includes things like wharfage and dockage. It was down about 2% or $7,000. A big part of that was, if you recall, we had oil crew boats coming into the harbor, dropping their crew off when they were fixing the Casitas Pier down in Carpinteria. That pier was repaired and they moved back down there. Our investment income, as anticipated, down significantly. That's a combination of not as much revenue to invest. We're actually using it on projects and things like that. And then obviously extremely low interest rates. Our rents and concessions were up about 7%. That's things like that are kind of outside the norm. Things like the yacht club lease, the UCSB sailing lease, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration lease, things like that. So those are likely just due to built-in increases in their lease. And then miscellaneous, saw a decrease of about 58%. A big part of this is the fact that if you recall, July 4th, 2020, we did not have fireworks. So that saved us some money. Unfortunately, I think that's something we'd all like to spend some money on, but we did not have that fireworks on back in 2020. Next slide, please. So on the expenditure side, another good year. We really went back and throughout the year and really ratcheted down on our expenses. Big picture, we were down 10% over our what we budgeted. So that saved us a little over $2 million. Next slide, please. I'll get into some detail as well. Our salary and benefits, we're down $763,000 or 10%. We kept a number of positions open. Our facilities manager was kept open from July until December when Mr. Adair came on. We still have a Harbor Patrol officer spot open, numerous hourly positions. We had an administrative assistant position open. So all those things add up over the year. But ideally, we'd like to get back to full staff. That's a much more sustainable and tenable thing for us. Materials and supplies also cut by about 10% or $500,000. Special projects down to the tune of $28,000. That also gets back to the July 4th, 2020 cancellation. And our capital outlay was down 540%. That's because we just took on less and fewer projects. We wanted to save some money, and we were continuing, as Mr. Adair is showing in his presentation, you continue with planning and things like that, but we did need to set all that money aside at one time. And so that helped us as far as capital outlay is concerned. Next slide, please. So in summary, our fiscal year 2021 budget target for revenues was just over $14.4 million. We came in at over $15.7 million. And just to put that in context, it's a little over $800,000 more than fiscal year 2020. And if you recall, fiscal year 2020 only had really 3-4 months of COVID. So, and this particular fiscal year 2021, we basically had major impacts throughout the year. So we're happy to see things moving in the right direction as far as revenues are concerned. And I'm going to guess that Commissioner Nelson has a question for me.
I do. I'm just as you did a great report on where we were with the rent deferral program and that people are paying back at a great and expeditious rate. I'm curious about what we defer, the capital deferments that we did. And it looks as though it was like $520,000 in capital outlays. I'm assuming a lot of that had to do with COVID. And so when Mr. Adair and the enterprising maintenance crews figured out a way to save $400,000, is there a way to shift that money from the sewer lift station to the deferred list that we incurred as a result of the COVID cutbacks?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Nelson, that's a good question. And so what happens with budgeted expenditures and then revenues over projections, all that gets put back into our fund balance. And so we have the ability to then portion that out accordingly. So with deferred maintenance, if we want to get a project back up and running that we had to push off for a year or two, we would be able to do that. Keep in mind too that we want to restore our reserves. We did, the plan this year was to dip into those reserves a little bit. So it'd be nice to get those back up to the council required amounts. But I think we're doing pretty good. And I think we're going to be able to bring some projects back quicker than we anticipated. As long as staffing can handle it. Yeah, it's a good thing. So definitely.
It would be good. It would be interesting to know, one, what projects we deferred, and then to let us know when we bring them back, I guess.
Sure, we can do that. And I'm sorry, I don't have the projects out on the top of my head. We've done so much cutting, and even this year's fiscal year 22's capital program, we really cut that down. So hopefully we'll be able to pick some of those projects up sooner as opposed to later.
Okay.
And just to hop in there, Commissioner Nelson, we did present that list to you with the budget proposal. We basically redlined projects that were being removed with the exact dollar amounts. And so we can bring that back, and we do revisit our capital program every year. And so every year we kind of revisit and reshuffle. As you know, no project ever costs exactly what it's budgeted. It's often over or under. And so there's always some moving around of funds. And that really occurs on a yearly basis. So that's when we kind of reprioritize those projects and bring it back to you guys.
Okay.
And is that, I'm not sure if I have more slides, I'm sorry. Next slide, okay, no, that's it. And any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I have something. Yeah, thanks for the detailed budget presentation, Mr. Bossi.
You're welcome.
My question is regarding the reserves. I noticed that there is something called, like in the Muni Code, the Reserve for Harbor Preservation Fund. And I noticed that on the table 2 of the expenditures, there's that final line item, the appropriated reserve. And it looks like, I was just wondering if that is the Reserve for Harbor Preservation Fund, and just kind of like, just how that works. And it looks like we only spent, I mean, 2,000 of the 100,000, which I mean is great. And I'm just kind of curious as to when do we dip into the reserves for like a specific project, or just kind of how that works.
Chair McCray, Commissioner Stanwyck. So the number you're looking at, appropriated reserve, that's something completely different. Although it has the word reserve in it. So appropriated reserves, every department budgets for that. And basically, appropriated reserves are to be used for things that unforeseen issues that pop up during the year. The other year, if I recall, our Harbor Patrol truck was found to basically be completely rusted out underneath, axles ready to crack and split. And so that was something that had a 13-year payback where we were going to buy one every 13 years. We cut that back to 6 years, and we had to purchase a new one immediately. So we took about $36,000 from that fund, from the appropriated reserve, to pay for that. The $2,000 you see in this particular expenditure is the cost of our fiscal agent who manages our indebtedness and things like that. So that's that annual cost for them. So the large reserve, a harbor preservation fund and thing like that, that's a completely different number. And thankfully, no, it is not $100,000. It's more to the tune of about around the $2 million, $3 million range. So yeah. And then how we use that. This year for budgeting purposes, I believe we just had to dip in to a little. We're supposed to keep a minimum of $2 million. We dipped a little bit into that, but we cut our capital so much that we really only had to dip in a little. But as I said, with all this, the savings, which we just presented to you, we might be able to shore that reserve up again, and then start to bring back some of those projects that we had to cut out.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bossi, just a comment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, you can't control revenue, but on the expense side, there were obviously some deferrals, but it also looks like the department did quite an effective job in controllable expenses and keeping those low. And I know you still got to run the whole operation with lower resources, and looks like a job well done.
Chair McCray, Commissioner Sly, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It was definitely a group effort.
I concur. Good job, Brian.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Great report. Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions. Our next item on the agenda, item number 9, is the West Beach Storage Permit fee waiver for the Chumash Tumal Canoe. Excuse me. Does staff have an introduction for this?
Yeah, and Angela, I think there's one slide. And so this is really the same item that came to the commission last week by the way of my director's report. I wanted to bring it up again for discussion and possible action and recommendation to council. We got a little snafu with the Brown Act last time, so we're kind of reintroducing it here so we can have the commission speak about it and take an action and ultimately make a recommendation to council. So as you all know, the Waterfront oversees a permit program that utilizes a portion of West Beach for outriggers and surf canoes and sailboats and all sorts of equipment. This space is really nice to have. It provides a huge benefit to the folks who utilize it, and it really allows to store equipment and a nice, calm, protected area to launch. And so it's a really nice area and a really, really good thing to have. Back in July, Coastal Chumash placed one of their classic wooden Tomol canoes at this location. And so they're now requesting that the $275 per year fee be waived. And as I mentioned last time, waiving fees is really a council action because that's part of budget and our fee resolution. And so this is scheduled to go to council on September 28th, but I know that they would certainly appreciate Harbor Commission's insight and input and any recommendations you have to council prior to them kind of making their decision on September 28th. So with that, I'll turn it back to the commission, and then I'll also ask Angela if there's any public comment. I know there might have been a public commenter on this item.
At this time, there's nobody with their hand raised, but if anyone would like to make a public comment, they can indicate that by clicking the raise lower their hand icon on the control panel, and I'll let them know when it's their turn to speak. But there are still no hands.
Thank you very much. So we can, let's kick this off and see if we have any questions for staff on this item or discussion amongst the commissioners. Ms. Kramer?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any discussion. I have just a comment. I want to thank the Mr. Lopez's and Steve Villa for their letter to us explaining the Tomol and why they're asking for the fee to be waived or suggesting that the fee be waived. I think it was a very persuasive letter and very, very helpful. So thank you to them. And I particularly found helpful their emphasis on the history and the education that the Tomol serves.
Thank you very much. Is there anything further?
Well, I would move
So,
then to, okay, if there's no more, I would make a motion.
I think it's time for that. Please.
Does anyone else have a comment? But I'd make a motion then that we recommend to council that the $275 fee be waived.
I second that motion.
And so we have a motion. Thank you, and we have a second. Is there any other further discussion? Seeing.
Oh yeah, I just want to make a comment. Yeah, yeah, I mean, for me, looking at this, I mean, the only concerns really, or the downside, is that this could set a precedent for other stuff. But in this, I don't really think it is the case. I mean, the Chumash are a very specific group, and the type of event, this storage of the canoe, is a very specific waterfront activity. And so I think that this is fair and reasonable in this case. And along with that, you know, it's evident by the public comments from the last meeting, as well as the written letters, that this is something that this group cares about a lot. And so, yeah, that's kind of my opinion on why I think this is a good thing for us to approve and recommend to council.
Thank you. Is there anything further from any of the commissioners? So with that, I'll call for the question and we'll do a roll call vote.
Chair McRae, someone from the audience did raise their hand. Do you want to do public comment before the vote?
Yes, we'll do that and then have an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Marcus Lopez, I'm going to unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And it appears that you're self-muted at the moment.
Yes, Commissioners, thank you very much. The Chair and Vice Chair for your concern, your comment, and a positive vote for this particular request. Just to let you know, the reason I didn't comment earlier, I just got a cramp in my leg. So I just finally got that cramp out. Being an ocean person, sometimes it happens. and really appreciated you reading the memo that we sent you. This is definitely a very special experience that we have with the tomo and the ceremonial significance, and that, truth be told, that this is part of the healing process of all of us in our communities. And so we hope to have further discussions on the history, especially with the interaction of the harbor and all the different variables that the commissioners overview. It's always educational to listen to your agenda and to all the matters concerning the waterfront, and particularly at the same time, we wish to acknowledge that we'll be more part of that experience and aid as much as possible with the festivities and other actions that we can be a part of. And this is not only for the Tomo captains, but yet the Chumash community will like, and there's different forms, there's different ways in order to participate within the healing and the activities of the harbor to make it not only in the case of which all the commissioners acknowledge our harbor, but yet the harbor of everybody that comes and visit us. So I really appreciate you submitting it to the city council, the recommendations, and I really encourage any other individuals that want some more history of the Chumash to let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker with respect to his comment? Seeing none. Ms. Rodriguez?
Okay, Commissioner Nelson? Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Sly?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Stedman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer?
Yes.
Chair McCray?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our first action item of the evening. Item 10 is the review of the Harbor Patrol activities, which was passed onto a future meeting, and we'll look forward to that. And item 11 is it's a rather complex change of lease agreement, and I'll turn to Mr. Brian Bossie to introduce it.
Good evening, Commissioner McCray and fellow commissioners. It is a little bit complex, so I'm going to walk you through this, but really when you get down to it, it's not. And you'll get it, hopefully, as we move through. So Mr. Aaron Peterson assumed lease number 23328 through a lease assignment process approved by the City Council back in March of 2020. He assumed ownership and started operating in May of that same year. And his original plan was to come in, operate the business, and then in the winter months, that winter, shut down and do some very much needed capital improvements. But with COVID still in full swing, he decided to make those improvements right out the gate. Next slide, please. So what Mr. Peterson did was he changed both the upstairs and the downstairs facilities. The upstairs is Salty at the Beach, and that's on the left side of the screen. And down below, he changed what was the more formal Chuck's into Chomp. And upstairs at Salty at the Beach, it's a bar and grill that focuses on California-style tavern cuisine. It's got a lot of different award-winning wines as well as craft beers. Downstairs, Chomp on the Rocks is similar to Mr. Peterson's successful Chomp restaurant in Solvang. Burgers and fries and shakes, really catering to families and young adults. Next slide. As you can see, it's just amazing work. I mean, it's a breath of fresh air in both places. Next slide, please. So the current lease, again, it's both upstairs and downstairs, not immediately on top of each other. It's an interesting lease space, to say the least. And we have a few of these within the waterfront. So the total square footage is 8,525 square feet, pays about a little over $24,100 per month in rent. He's also on a percentage rent basis. So he pays 10% of everything up to and including $3 million. And then everything beyond that pays 11%. The current term for that particular lease dates back to 2010. And it was a 10-year initial term. And then he had 4 5-year options with that. So he's in kind of the start of his first of those 4 options. That will conclude on the December 31st of 2025. And then he has 3 additional 5-year options. So Mr. Peterson contacted the Waterfront Department back in July about amending the lease and requested that it be amended and essentially split into 2 separate leases. This will help with both governing the businesses downstairs and upstairs, little separation between the 2 entities, the 2 businesses. And so working with our city attorney's office, Sarah Connect, we took the existing lease number 23328, and amended that. That's the amendment number 3. And we moved that, we reduced the overall size of the lease to just fit the upstairs component, just the Salty at the Beach. So the existing lease basically turns into, instead of both spaces, just Salty at the Beach. At the same time, we split out and are requesting a new lease for the downstairs portion, Chomp on the Rocks. Next slide, please. So what we did, this is the proposed amendment number 3. We mapped out the square footage of the upstairs component, the 47 square feet. We put the base rent at $12,868.01 per month. That's a slight, the last per square foot average was, I believe, 2.82789. So we ticked it up to just get to 2.83. Obviously, we don't want to lose money on this deal. We want to keep it as easy and even as possible. There are some changes to the percentage rent. Obviously, you're cutting the size down significantly, and we're proposing a percentage rent of 10% up to $1.25 million. And then above $1.25 million, it would go to 11.4. So if you remember when it ticked up at $3 million, it went to 11%. Well, this 10% and this 11.4% are very much in line with all of our other waterfront tenants. I think the only one that is a little different is the Harbor Restaurant, and that lease is, 25, 30 years old. So this is bringing it up to the current standards of the waterfront leases. We would keep the same term, so it would expire, the existing option would expire on 12/31/25, and it would still have 3 5-year options. So that's the upstairs component. That's the amendment number 3 to lease 23328. Next slide, please. So the second part of this is the proposed new lease, and this comes in with Chomp on the Rocks, the downstairs component. That lease space is 3,978 square feet. Again, we took the $2.83 per square foot. So that base rent monthly, $11,257.74. Same percentage rent structure as the upstairs, as well as almost all of our other waterfront tenants. 10% up to and including $1,250,000, 11.4% in excess of that. And the same initial term expires same initial option that expires 12/31/2025, and then still having 3 5-year options. I want to note that I did make a mistake. So the staff report has it at 2 5-year options, and that's an error on our part. So I'm sorry about that. This is the correct for all of these, is the current option and then 3 additional 5-year options. Next slide, please. So essentially, trying to summarize this, we're proposing to amend lease agreement number 23328 to include only Salty at the Beach. Again, a reduction of the premises just to the upstairs component. And then also a new lease with Chomp on the Rocks. The proposed base lease rates exceed the current rate. You recall it was at $3 million. We didn't just half it in the 1.5, we took that down to 1.25. We think that's better for everybody in this scenario, and in the long term, will generate more revenue for the waterfront. And again, the proposed percentage rent rates are in line with existing waterfront restaurant tenants. So I hope that explains what can easily get spun out and be a little bit confusing, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Sly.
Mr. Bossi, it's great that you have improved in this proposed change our position as to percentage rent. I'm curious why the tenant wants this split. What are they trying to achieve? What's the purpose?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Sly, I think a big part of it is just the simple separation of the two businesses, whether that be for tax purposes or just simple accounting on a monthly basis. When you have these two different facilities that they're not even joined together. They're on different sides of the building. I think it's easier to operate. You have separate kitchen areas, separate costs, and things like that. It makes it kind of easier for us as well from an accounting perspective. It breaks it down a little bit easier. That's my understanding of Mr. Peterson's request. It's more of an ease, more flexibility with the two businesses.
Okay, and as you know, this is my old song, but I always object to leases, restaurant leases going out to. This one goes out to 2040, and a lot can happen over that period of time. So I would always prefer not to have all those 5-year options hanging out there. But on the other hand, it's nice to improve the percentage rent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Sly. One real quick thing on that. Mr. Peterson put in, I want to say close to at least $1 million on the upward side of $1 million, refurbishing both of these spaces. The downstairs, everything was completely redone. I can tell you that people from County Health who inspect our businesses regularly were ecstatic at the improvements. They were very thankful for the amount of capital that Mr. Peterson put in. So in this, and I agree with your long-term, getting things out beyond 10, 15, 20 years, this will really help Mr. Peterson amortize his initial investment in the business. And you can imagine coming in right when COVID's kicking in and then dumping in, hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million into this. And we're still not back to a pre-COVID restaurant level. So we appreciate all that he's done down there. And I think in the long term, the split will definitely serve the waterfront as well as the public a lot better.
I have a question, Brian. As I recall, when Mr. Peterson took over this business, he did not purchase the events that were in queue. Is that correct? That's a commodity, that a restaurant has in that location, the scheduled events. And I don't think that he purchased those. Do you recall that?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Stedman, purchase events. I'm not understanding.
Well, there were scheduled events at the time that the transaction took place. The business changed hands with scheduled events in the future. And I believe this owner said, I don't want those scheduled events, right? They can just go away with the old business. So my question is, whether you have any knowledge of it or not, my question is, does he have events scheduled in order to increase revenue, or is he still limited because of the COVID protocols, or what's going to be the big revenue driver for this investment that he's made?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Stedman, I'm not sure about the events. Chuck's and the old grill really didn't have large events. They did cater some for Maritime Museum events and things like that. But so I'm not sure about the purchase event. I'm not sure how that worked. And to be honest, once COVID hit, every event was wiped off the map. So even if there were events, they all went away. I know that Mr. Peterson is working hand in hand with the Maritime Museum. The Maritime Museum really wants to push their events. We've got a beautiful space, obviously, and they are working together for when those events do come back online, to work out some agreement to cater to those events. Mr. Peterson is a savvy businessman. He runs a number of successful restaurants up in Solvang, and his main driver is the people eating and drinking, coming down, enjoying a nice, beautiful space with some of the best views in Santa Barbara by far, ample parking to boot. So he's really pushing the restaurant, and as things get back online, I think we're going to see a big uptick in activity down here. And you know, if people show up and one of those businesses is packed, we have a number of other businesses, and vice versa. So if Brophy's is packed, they can go over here. So they really feed off each other in a positive way in that sense.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great answer.
Do we have any other further questions for Mr. Bossy? All right then. Well, seeing none, are there any is there any public comment out there?
At this time, there is no members of the public with their hand raised.
Well, thank you very much. So I guess that takes us to looking for a motion on this. It is an action item. So we're being asked to recommend approval by the City Council. And I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
And do we have a second?
Motion to
Second.
approve.
And I believe we have a motion and a second. Is there any other further discussion before we move to a vote? Seeing none. Ms. Rodriguez, would you conduct a roll call vote for us?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Stanwyck,
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes,
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Chair McCray.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All
Thank you.
right. Thank you. So that,
well,
yes, go ahead.
yeah, hi, I think there were two articles. I mean, there was A, review and recommend we approve lease amendment 3 to lease agreement and so forth. And then the next one was to approve a new separate lease agreement with Mr. Aaron Peterson for Chomp on the Rocks. Were both of those coalesced, or should we vote on both?
I believe we voted on them together, but if we should vote on them separately, we can. It would seem that they cannot go independently.
Okay, well, I was just questioning.
Mr. Chair, it'd be, my thought on that, because I was paying attention to that and about to interrupt, but I think that the motion was to approve, which would have been the staff recommendation, and the staff recommendation had 2 parts. So I think just a motion to approve would encompass both parts of the recommendation. But if you wanted to go back and, you know, make it even more clear and do another motion to include part B so that it was clear that you were doing both, that would be fine too, but it's up to you. I think the motion, you know, to approve included both parts of that.
Thank you very much for that. Vice Chair Kramer, would you
No, I'm fine then.
do a second vote on the second part?
It's whatever you think our motion was. I didn't hear it said that we approve both, but if everybody else thought so, that's fine with me.
All right, I think we'll move forward unless anybody has any objections. Thank you very much. So with that, I am going to turn to, I think I'm going to turn to Mr. Wiltshire for a quick staff introduction, and then I believe the Slip Assignment Policy Subcommittee will speak to this item.
Yeah, thanks, Chair McCray. And I'll preface it, we don't usually take breaks. This is a pretty diligent group, but we've been at it a little while. I just wanted to check with you if anyone in the group needed a break or if we should just kind of motor on through this.
Commissioners?
Let's keep going.
Voter.
All right. Steady group. Yeah, well, my bid will be quick, but as you know, the Full Harbor Commission created a slip policy subcommittee about 1.5 years ago. This committee has met pretty diligently. The subcommittee is made up of Chair Stedman, Chair Sloan, and or Commissioner Sloan and Commissioner Nelson. And this is really a subcommittee update to the Harbor Commission. So Commissioner Stedman is actually going to lead the presentation, and I'll step back. But I think he can speak best to the fact that it's just kind of gotten to a point where there's been a lot of good work done, and it's been time to bring back to the full commission. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Stedman.
Thank you, Director Wiltshire. I appreciate that. And also I want to commend the waterfront staff for preparing, such a comprehensive outline that we're going to take the full commission and the public through right now. I guess maybe Chairman McCray, do we want to check to see if there's any public comment before we start presenting?
I think go ahead and do your presentation and then we'll take public comment after that.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. Angela, can you advance the slide, please? All right. So the presentation outline is going to cover the slip assignment policy subcommittee history. As Director Wiltshire indicated, we've been pretty diligent over an extended period of time. Some of the main points of public concern that we are going to address are the county possessory interest tax, family additions and inheritance, and the slip transfer fee rates. We'll also cover any potential changes to the slip transfer policy, the harbor user survey, and discussion and next steps. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the recap to date. So on July 16th of 2020, there was a presentation Harbor Commission on slip assignment policy, and there was significant public interest. The waterfront received roughly 24 emails on the subject. So, we heard public comment from 20 members of the harbor community. In September, we formed the slip assignment policy subcommittee. We set up to review the slip assignment policy and report back to Harbor Commission. As Director Wiltshire mentioned, the members are Commissioner Sloan, Commissioner Nelson, and myself. In October of 2020, we created a document repository for historical documents. Again, in October, we had meeting number 1, the first slip assignment policy subcommittee meeting. Skipping ahead to January 2021, we had meeting 2, and we covered the county possessory interest tax discussion. In February, meeting number 3, we discussed adding children to the slip permits. In March, we discussed slip permit transfer fee rates and structure. And then in April, meeting number 5, we discussed a potential slip permit transfer fee set of changes. And then in May, meeting number 6, we had further review of the fee structure, assessor data, family additions, and we discussed the harbor survey. So that was quite comprehensive. And then in July, meeting number 7, we dove into the harbor user survey, the slip transfer fee structure, and more discussion on the family additions. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's a little history for everyone, the public and my fellow commissioners on slip assignment policy. In 1975, the council adopted its first slip assignment policy. And then in 1982, there was a grand jury and state lands commission report generated, which reviewed the trust revenues and expenditures, the accounting methods, and the trust uses, including slip transfers. And there, the need was identified for policy updates to impose slip transfer fees to address concerns with slip transfer abuse and profiting off the trust-owned land. In 1982, the slip transfer fee was established of $10 per foot. That was Resolution 82-118. The Harbor Commission and City Council approved that in response to the State Lands Report. And then again in 1983, the grand jury report recommended that there should be improvements to maintenance and upkeep of the harbor and recommended revisions to the slip assignment policy to stop further abuses. In 1984, the council acknowledged and approved the grand jury findings, and the waterfront and city adopted changes to the policy to address those issues. Next slide. Continuing on, in 1987, there was an increase in the slip transfer fee to $50 per foot. That was Resolution 85-092. Per the recommendations to increase the slip fees over time to better match the market value. In 1990, there was a grand jury report that made additional recommendations to tighten up slip assignment policy, including no adding of partners to slips without a transfer fee, and the requirement for strict compliance with current policy to avoid abuse. In 1999, the council agenda report, in that report, the waterfront was provided an in-depth report back to council on slip assignment and outlined slip assignment policy and transfer fee history to date. Then again in 2001, a grand jury report indicated the harbor was generally well run, with the main area of concern being slip assignment policy. The main point of concern was the lack of fairness with the existing system and conveying value to a public resource to private individuals. Slip permit transfer fee is only a small portion of the private-to-private slip permit sale. And then the report also recommended that slip assignments are eliminated and moved to a wait list approach. Then again in 2016, the grand jury reported and found that the waterfront in the city were operating within applicable state and local regulations, and also discussed the county taxation of slip permits due to exclusive access to a publicly owned asset. So moving right along, please, the next slide. So here are the main points of public concern summarized. Number one, the county possessory interest tax. There are concerns with being taxed on something slip permit holders do not own. There's also a misunderstanding generally of assessment and the reasoning and entity behind the taxation. Another main point of public concern is the inheritance and adding family members to slip permits. There is a desire to add family members to slip permits without paying a transfer fee or having a discounted transfer fee. And there is a desire for slip permits to be inheritable. The third main point of public concern is that the transfer fee is seen as too high or unfair. And that, the fee ranges between 5% and 45% of the estimated market value of the slips. So it's proportionally a larger fee for the smaller slips. And there are complaints of disproportionate fees for administrative work provided. Moving along, Angela. So to give a recap of the public correspondence, public concerns were raised. So since June 2020, the waterfront has received direct correspondence that includes email and telephone from 51 of roughly 1,000 slip holders. So the concerns, the slip transfer fee inquiries, were 51, family additions and inheritance 16, and the county possessory interest tax 12. So there's been strong participation in these subcommittee meetings, 20 plus members of the public. The bulk of the public correspondence participation was early on in the process. And just a reminder here, for the public, the slip holders can contact the Waterfront Department anytime with their questions or concerns, right? This is displayed. We have Director Wiltshire's direct email, or of course the General Harbor at santabarbara.gov email address. Next slide, please. Okay. Possessory interest tax issue. Here's the public issue. Why do slip permittees pay possessory interest tax on something they don't own? Here's the response. The county assessor's office collects that possessory interest tax from the individuals who have exclusive access to a public resource, such as a slip at a public harbor. So the Waterfront Department has little input on this process and sees no financial benefit from that. Next slide, please. So the possessory interest tax issue, that's a taxable possessory interest, and it can be defined as the taxable interest held by a private possessor in publicly owned real property. A possessory interest may exist when a person or entity leases, rents, or uses a non-taxable real property owned by a government agency. And here's a few examples. Single-family homes rented to private individuals, not low-income housing. Private hangar at a public airport. Permit to use a berth at a harbor. Cabins on U.S. Forest Service land. Cattle grazing rights on public land. A restaurant at a municipal golf course. Airport car rental counters in the associated areas. And rights and real property associated with a cable TV franchise. Next slide, please. The possessory interest tax issue, to continue, is not, it's managed by the county assessor's office. There's no benefit to the waterfront or the city. The method of valuing slip permits includes private market value, 7 years of monthly slip fee history, and slip transfer fees. Slip permittees are taxed annually, and the waterfront provides education to slip permittees on that tax process. Next slide, please. The family additions issue. So here's the public issue. There is a desire to add adult family members to slip permits for free or at a reduced rate. Our response is the Waterfront Department, the City Attorney, and the State Lands Commission thoroughly reviewed these issues and came to similar conclusions, which are outlined in the following slides. So here are the issues on family additions. Number one, it's not fair and equitable. Subsidizing certain families' retention of marina slips violates the city's duty to protect the people's common heritage in the tidelands. It arbitrarily selects one group over another group. And it exacerbates an existing supply issue by further restricting limited supply of slips to the general public. Furthermore, it would violate the city's fiduciary duty as the state's trustee under the public trust doctrine. So the city has a duty to protect beneficiaries of that trust, who are all the people of the state of California. The city has a duty to administer granted land solely for the benefit of the statewide public, and to act impartially in the management of the trust property. The citation there is Public Resources Code section 6009.1, paragraphs 5 and 6. And it would violate the express terms of the Tidelands Trust document, which prohibits discriminatory rates and charges. Next slide, please. Family additions issue. So here's the conclusion. A reduced slip permit transfer fee to add adult family of existing slip permittees violates the city's legal obligations under the Tidelands Trust. The city has an obligation to manage the tidelands in a fair and equitable manner. Next slide, please. The slip transfer fees issue. So here's the public issue. Slip transfer fees are seen as unfair. They're disproportionate based on slip size and generally too high. Our response is the Waterfront Department has implemented a slip transfer policy over the last 40 years under the guidance from the Harbor Commission, the full Harbor Commission, the State Lands Commission, and the grand jury, which has, been designed and modified to deter abuse and ensure the best and most appropriate use of harbor slips while ensuring a fair and beneficial return to the waterfront. Next slide, please. Here are some potential changes to the slip transfer fees. And the main discussion points are these. Number one, to implement a slip transfer fee structure that is more fair and proportional across all slip sizes. A base slip transfer fee on a percentage of average private market value of the slip permit, and making sure that we maintain a budget neutral change going forward. So there are some decisions to be made, not this evening, but going forward. And they can include a change to the proportional slip transfer fee based on market values, a method for determining market values as a basis for charging slip permit transfer fees, how best to use the county assessor's valuation data, and what is the best implementation timeline. For example, a tiered implementation. Next slide, please. So this, and I'm sure Director Wiltshire will agree with this, this is a very busy slide with a lot of numbers, but essentially it's a historical comparison of slip transfer fees as a percentage of private market value. So as of 2020, the proportion ranges from 10% on the larger slips, the 60-footers, to 40% on the smaller slips. That is the percentage of the slip transfer fee. It does identify a proportional discrepancy between the small and the large slips. You can see that clearly. And the discrepancy is, interestingly, improving over time as the larger slip transfer fees continue to increase.
I want to stop you there for just a minute, Commissioner Stedman. I'd like to ask you to first point out your axes here. The years are pretty clear, but the percentage on the left and then the colored dots and the bars on the right, kind of describe those to us, if you would, please. And then hopefully we'll have enough time after your description to really take a good close look at that that figure. Thank you.
Right. And I'm going to let Director Wiltshire help out on this slide because his staff compiled the data, but essentially the axis on the right, Chairman McCray, describes the different, slip size categories, right? So Director Wiltshire, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Chair McCray, Commissioner Stedman, it is admittedly a super busy slide, but it was kind of integral and a little bit, it really shed some light on this dynamic. So the intent to take away with this is really high level. So on the right axis is just a list of the slip sizes ranging from 20 to 60 feet. So in each year, all of those bars represent categories of slip sizes. Really, the historical data is interesting, but if you just look at the bars above 2020, so that represents the slip transfer fee as a percentage of the market value. So looking at just a 60-foot slip, which is the navy blue column on the far right, the smallest little bar. So that's showing about 10%. So what that means is the slip transfer fee is about 10% of the estimated sort of private market value of that slip. Whereas if you go down to the other end of the spectrum at a 20-foot slip where it's, I don't know, what is that color? Light purple. It's higher, so it's 40%. And so really the takeaway from all of this is that there is sort of a bit of a discrepancy between smaller slips and their market value and larger slips and their market value with the percentage of the slip transfer fee being paid. The historical data shows that it is going in the right direction. As we freeze slip transfer fees on smaller slips and continue to increase larger slips, that equity will kind of reach itself over some period of time. But this was kind of a graph that was showing that sort of perceived imbalance, and that it is currently in a process of taking a long time to even itself out. Does that help clarify what this is trying to get across?
Thank you very much. I think it's very helpful.
Good. I mean, yeah, thank you, Chair McCray. I mean, you know, a lot of this data is, you know, you have to look at it a few times, right, to really understand the way that it's represented. So I appreciate your question. I just wanted to make sure that staff had an opportunity to answer that, because they actually compiled the slides. Next slide, please, Angela. Okay, so, you know, just to keep things interesting, right, here's another comprehensive slide, right? And what this is showing is the concept of a possible tiered implementation over a 3 to 7 year period. And if you look at the blue color, coloring over the grid, that represents, for example, if you look at the 20-foot slip length column on the far left, you'll see 3 light blue shaded blocks, right? Does everybody see that on the far left? And if you compare that to the 60-foot slip column on the far right, you can see that there are 7 colored blocks. So what that coloration represents is the time to implement slip transfer fee changes, right? So for the 20-foot slips, the change would occur much faster in a 3-year time period. And then for the larger slips, 60-footers in this particular graphic, that change would take place over a longer period of time. So this is an example of a possible tiered implementation, because, you know, once we become decisive as a full Harbor Commission and go forward with, you know, approving a change, if we do, it's going to be up to Waterfront to implement it. So we had to consider, you know, several models and approaches. And Commissioner Nelson, if you want to chime in on this particular slide, feel free to. I know he likes this approach, and really we have to give credit to Commissioner Sloan, who isn't here this evening, but I think, you know, he gave the kernel of this idea, and then of course Director Wiltshire and the Waterfront Department developed the graphic for us. So Commissioner Nelson, did you want to provide any input?
Well, just generally, my thought was if we had a disparity between what small slips owners were paying as opposed to the large slip holders, that we ought to try to address that as best we could, as quickly as we could. We felt that the best way to do that was to try to get to a situation where everybody paid the same percentage of the market value of their slip. And then it was how best to get to that percentage. And at one time we were looking at, let's take 10 years to do that. And I personally felt that was just too long. If we were going to make this change and we're going to try to make things more fair, let's do it more quickly. And so what Jim Sloan did was come up with this particular approach, working with Director Wiltshire, that would focus first on the aggrieved, if you will, the smaller slip holder, first, and then move on to the larger slip holders. So we thought this was a balanced approach, a transition that made it happen in a reasonable period of time. But again, the goal was to have everybody understand that they are paying the same percentage of value that everybody else is. Whether it's a big slip or a little slip, you're paying the same percentage. And this is a way to try to create a transition to get there.
And you can see right in the middle of this graphic, the 40-foot slips don't really experience much disruption, right? They're sort of the natural midpoint for this data. But I think it's a very interesting graphic just in terms of the ingenuity of the concept, and also how Waterfront managed to display it. So hopefully it's straightforward enough for everybody to grasp. Of course, if you have any further questions, Director Wiltshire will hop on at the end. I think we just have one more slide. So let's move to that. Okay, so for discussion and recommendation, here are the considerations for the full Harbor Commission. To confirm, our position on the county possessory interest tax issue, to confirm our position on the family additions and inheritance issue, and consider changing slip transfer fees to be more proportional to average market value, which will require additional staff time and effort to implement, because they're going to have to figure out, a method for determining those market values, the implementation timeline, and making sure, because this is an enterprise department, that, we're maintaining a budget neutral change process. So, and of course, we want to open up the discussion of the full Harbor Commission so that, at some point going forward, it does not have to happen this evening at all. This is just an update, but we'll have some recommendations. And if we need to do, additional public outreach, then we'll conduct that at the subcommittee level.
Thank you very much for that. I think what I'd like to do here is to take whatever further addition that Mr. Wiltshire might have to this presentation, and then have a few minutes for us as commissioners to ask questions narrowly focused on the presentation itself, not broad about the topic itself, but just narrowly focused on the presentation so that we all understand it while we have the chance. And then we'll take public comment and have an opportunity to ask any questions we might have of the commenters. And then we'll come back around and discuss this more broadly in terms of concerns that any of the commissioners might have, or anything else like that. So it'll be kind of phased. First, to just some questions on the presentation, the public speakers, and then we'll come back around to the broader topic. Thank you. So any questions for Commissioner Stedman? And then seeing none, Mr. Wiltshire, do you have anything to add?
Chair McCray, nothing specific, just that I know this was a lot of information distilled down into one presentation. The subcommittee has met pretty extensively over the last year and a half, and so Commissioner Stedman mentioned it, but this is no final decisions need to get made tonight, but we really are at a point as staff where we could use some direction moving forward on these specific items. And so I think Commissioner Stedman laid it out pretty clearly that two of the major items, there's not a lot of room to move, but there is sort of a tentative straw proposal in front of the Harbor Commission on adjusting slip transfer fees.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson?
Just one thing. I kind of want to applaud John Stedman for going through so many years of history on this. I know I couldn't have done it, but my take on the history of this thing is a little different It sounds like there was sort of a logical thing, and the grand juries and everybody sort of agreed this is the way we were going to do slip transfers. I think it was a very contentious history. When the State Lands Commission looked at this and the Attorney General's office looked at this, there's a reason why they did that. And that was because the grand jury raised issues of real concern. And that report, for example, said, you know, you really shouldn't have a slip transfer fee. You really should basically phase it out so you don't have the slip transfer fee. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to do a slip transfer fee, then it ought to reflect the market, the value of essentially the state submerged lands. And that's when we went down the path to do the slip transfer fees. And it's always been contentious. It's always been complicated. But what staff and I think our working group has done is basically break it down so we can make some improvements. It's not going to be perfect, but it is some improvements. We tried to achieve consensus with the commission members on the subcommittee, but also create a recommendation to you that the waterfront department was at least comfortable with. So it was a real consensus building effort. And I think there is a problem there. Grand juries are not impaneled because everything is going well. They're impaneled because there's deep concern about it. That deep concern was expressed by the public at meeting after meeting after meeting. And I just think that the Harbor Commission ought to consider favorably trying to make things, to improve things and level the playing field for the large slip holders and the small slip holders, and do it in a very reasonable, transitional way, working with staff to make the percentage work. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Commissioner Stedman? Seeing none?
Oh yeah, I just have one quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks to the subcommittee who put together this. I do have a question just regarding the first two items, the confirmed position. To me, it sounds like, I mean, we've done the due diligence in terms of the grand jury and the county, and these decisions are kind of beyond our jurisdiction, and that's the case here. Is that the case? Because if so, then we could pretty much drop those 2 points and move on to the parts that we do have some kind of authority on to discuss. And I'm just kind of curious as to what the next action is for those two first ones. If there's really, it sounds to me like there's nothing that we can do, and it's kind of the county and they've made the decision there.
Yeah, that's a good point, Commissioner Stanowick, on both matters. I think what the Waterfront Department and the subcommittee are trying to achieve here is just some consensus from the full Harbor Commission in terms of the level of understanding that those are immutable issues, right? I mean, there's really, you're 100% correct. There's not anything we can do to overcome those positions on both the county possessory interest tax and family additions.
Okay, thanks.
But we didn't know that going in. We didn't know that case was closed on the family additions until we had basically brought in the State Lands Commission and asked them that question. So we gathered information that reached this conclusion. So this was one
I
of
want
the,
to get on to our public commenters before we start having the broader discussion, but Commissioner, our Vice Chair Kramer had her hand up, so let's hear from her.
Yeah, I'm curious, do other waterfronts have a slip transfer fee, and is this a universal process, a universal criticism of it? I mean, I've just sort of accepted it, but I've been curious whether Ventura has it, I mean, Mount Monterey or wherever.
That's a great question, and I'm going to bring or ask Director Wiltshire to come online again and address that.
Yeah, Vice Chair Kramer, it's kind of a unique situation. This situation only arises when demand greatly surpasses supply. So in Ventura, they have slips available, so you don't need to transfer them. You can go there and just pay the monthly rate. Our scenario is so unique because there's so much demand and so little supply that it's created this sort of sub market for slips, and so that's what's created the ability to buy and like trade these permits for such high sums of money. And so it is a really unique scenario. There are other places where this exists out at Avalon, the mooring balls. So that's kind of a similar analogy that we looked into. Newport has some of this, but everybody does do it a little bit differently, but there is in essence a slip transfer fee in those locations where demand outstrips supply.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you. As I say, I've just assumed its existence, but without really thinking about it.
Thank you.
I have one other question as well. Yeah, that last bulleted point, recommend any additional public outreach. Yeah, I just wanted to remind basically, the Waterfront Commission and the public as well, that there was a survey that was sent out to all slip holders that had some pretty good questions on there. And as a slip holder, I mean, I took the survey, and I'm just kind of curious as to what, basically, if there's like kind of a synopsis of that we learned from the public outreach from the survey, and maybe just kind of a summary of some of the results or things that we've learned from that.
That's a great question, and I think we might have a slide that we had on standby that we if it's available we can share that.
Yeah, I don't happen to have it handy, but in short, it was we do have all that data, and it was pretty thorough, and the subcommittee reviewed it all. It seemed a little lengthy to kind of go through it here, but it would be really, if the Harbor Commission would like to review that data, we'd be happy to get it to you in any form. It was just kind of a really lengthy dive into it, so it probably would have taken the better part of 30 minutes to an hour just to go through just that bit. But that data did sort of inform the subcommittee and inform a lot of where this is going. So we'll make that data available, and we can certainly present on it at a future meeting.
For one, I would very much like to see that survey and like to see the responses.
Okay.
Well, thank you. That was a great presentation. Let's move along to public comment and give our public speakers a chance to add to this discussion, and then we'll look at broader questions and comments with respect to the process.
Chair McCray, at the moment, there's only one person from the public with their hand raised. Lori Rafferty, I'm going to call on you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And you may begin.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and especially the subcommittee. This has been a long haul. My husband and I have been slip permittee holders since 1987. So we've seen a lot of market fluctuations go up and down, a lot of harbor politics come and go. And it really has been a process that you have come to these facts and learned all this stuff. And I've learned a lot too. And so I want to say, I really agree with Mr. Commissioner Nelson about the tiered implementation. And I like his idea of doing it faster, 2 to 7 years. Because this, it just makes a lot more sense to get that going. And I have a problem with how you would figure out the average market value. That can be a very subjective process, and we do know there's fluctuations going on. We should find out more about that. I want to say, as a Marina One user, that the value of our access to our boat down there in the slip has gone down. And that is because of the overemphasis of tourism down there. We can't park. We're competing with tourists all the time. We're competing with tourists trying to get our gear down to our boat. And last time I looked, the Harbor Master Plan emphasized commercial fishing and recreational boating. And I really don't think eating in a restaurant is an ocean-dependent activity. So I know it brings in revenue. However, that does have something to do with the market value. And so I don't think we also got a marina survey. We were out of town actually getting to sail Friends Boat in Baja. So I would like to get a harbor user survey. Again, I would add our 2 adult family members, but I can't pay $18,000. So let's keep working on this. You've done a great job so far.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the commission?
I just want to make a point, Chair McCray. So it was mentioned to me by our waterfront director that he will begin, if he hasn't already, open office hours in addition to all the other, methods by which he can be approached. So maybe he wants to mention when those office hours are, just to continue to increase access and scope, for the public on this matter and others.
Thank you for that. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to just general comments for the subcommittee, questions and comments on the whole concept in general. So if you have something you'd like to say, please take the opportunity.
Well, I'd like to say I want to reiterate Commissioner Stanowic's comments about the confirming position on the county possessory interest tax issue and the position on the family additions and inheritance issue, and we saw that reflected in our public comment that we do not either as a subcommittee, waterfront department, or full harbor commission have any authority to make changes on those 2 issues.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much. I believe that brings us to commission and staff communications. Mr. Wiltshire?
Yeah, and just on the previous item, I just wanted to check one more time with Angela. I know that was a thorough presentation, that we didn't have any other public comment that we left in the fray.
There are no other members with their hands raised at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
The only staff communication I had is I had sent out an email to all the commissioners. We are entering into the recruitment phase. So we do for boards and commissions. So we do have 3 harbor commissioners whose terms expire as of December 31st. So I'll get information back from those members if they're looking to reapply. I know Commissioner Stedman has let me know that he is looking to up his term. So I'll get with the other commissioners and let you know, but I just wanted to let the commission know that we are entering that recruitment phase. So if either Sloan or Sly will not be re-upping, we'll be on the lookout for a new harbor commissioner. So I'll get back to you by email as soon as possible as I hear back from those. And unfortunately, we lost Commissioner Sly. It was probably too long to be sitting in his car. So I get it. And that's it for now. I'll send more information out on the boards and commissions recruitment process, and it's also available on the city website, but I'll make sure you guys are in the loop with that.
Can you, Director Wiltshire, can you mention your office hours? I think you mentioned that to me, and I made a point about it, but I don't know the structure.
Yeah, I did, and it was you're stealing the surprise a little. I was going to present on it next month.
Sorry.
I was tentatively waiting for the COVID cases to get a little better, but my intent is to open up an office hour to the public or anybody in the waterfront community to meet with me. So just a standing time on Wednesdays from noon to 1. You can contact me or Angela, our office, to kind of set up a time block and just meet with anyone and everyone who wants to talk or wants to know more about anything waterfront. So there's going to be, I'll put a little blurb in the next Docklines article. I'll put something out for next Harbor Commission and just kind of really detail that out on how the public can reach me and meet me. And they're also welcome to email me, call me anytime. I'm usually available.
Sorry, I didn't mean to preempt your,
No.
or take away the element of surprise.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. So get the word
I
out.
thought it's a great idea. So thank you.
That's all I had, Chair McCray.
Well, thank you for that. If there's nothing more, it's been a long meeting with lots and lots of information, stuff to digest. Thank you, Commissioner Stedman, for that extensive presentation. It really clarified a lot of things for me. And Commissioner Nelson for your bit on the subcommittee. It sounds like you both have been doing a lot of work, and then we're missing a commissioner that was also part of that. So thank you all. And with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
and a second.
Second.
All right, now we have a motion and a second. I don't think there's anybody that wants to discuss much about that, so we'll move right along to the roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Stanwyck,
Yes.
Commissioner Stedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
and Chair McCray.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are adjourned. Till next month.